Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're from. Thank you very much for joining this session on connecting the open. So connecting open access, open science or open research, and open education for an open Europe. So Europe is the focus. And I think it's really important that we work the land together. So those of us working on open access or open research, and those working on open education, we can really build a better future, a more sustainable future by connecting the opens, working the land together, if you like. And I really think we strongly believe that higher education institutions should take a more joined up approach to adopt a robust open agenda, to address the open silos, because actually a lot of the time we are really working in silos. We're not connected, although we have very similar tasks, capacities. And also, as the opens mature, it makes more and more sense for us to take a more strategic, joined up approach. So what I'm going to do today is talk to you briefly about a project, an organizational effectiveness grant, granted to us generously by the Hewlett Foundation. I'm working together with Paola Corti, who's our Open Education Community Manager. I'm speaking today, but it's really a collaborative presentation. And working together with Paul Stacey and Robert van der Voren from SURF. So they are advising us on this project. So we're really thinking about connecting the opens is helping institutional leaders commit to both of the opens so that we can scale up the bottom-up work that we've been doing so that they really commit to, on a policy level, on a financial level, and on an action level. Now, of course, we didn't invent the idea of connecting the opens. It was already back in 2008 where the Wheeler Declaration talked about the importance of connecting research publications, research data, educational resources, open standards, and open software. So really looking at all of the open assets across the institution. The Cape Town Declaration and at the 10th anniversary, 10 directions moving forward, they also talked about the importance of connecting with other open movements. The UNESCO recommendation on OER as part of developing supportive policy, here highlighted, we see that they recognize the importance of embedding OER policies into national policy frameworks. So they could be open access, open data, open source software, or open science ones. So often they are not necessarily something unique unto themselves. And of course, at the UNESCO World OER Congress in November, we will be looking at how far we all are with implementing the UNESCO recommendation on OER. UNESCO also has a recommendation on open science, and they really see open educational resources as part of open scientific knowledge. So although it's very much focused on research outputs like scientific publications or research data and open hardware and open source software, open educational resources is part of that story. So coming back to Spark Europe then, we have a network, a European network of open education librarians. And we published our open education strategy for the next 3 years, really looking at what were some of the challenges that we have as a bottom-up movement, above all, on progressing. And connecting the opens really addresses this first strategic goal in particular. So supporting open education policy development and encourage investment in open education in Europe's academic institutions for its sustainability. So many of the librarians that we serve and support, they hit a wall. This has been an issue where so many have been working behind the scenes, either off of open research work or part of other innovative work or other library work, working on open education. and really for them to upscale and to do more. And so many of them wanted to do more projects, but many of them were hitting a wall because they didn't necessarily have the funding, the program support, senior management behind them to move open education forward. So we were thinking, so what can we do here? Also because Spark Europe is very involved in open science as well as open data, fair data. And just to remind ourselves, also, our librarians are involved in all of the opens. They're often seen at the institution, at the university, as a trusted partner at the institution from the library. They're highly service oriented, as many of you know. They're the ones facilitating access to knowledge, but not only access to knowledge, but they're also buying. So they're buying that content, but they're also content creators and curators nowadays. They're publishers and they're legal advisors, as well as knowledge disseminators. So they take on very different roles, and many roles in the area of research as well as education. And they are the ones often really providing the leadership in setting open science and open education policies, goals, activities, be this bottom up or top down. And they're also increasingly collaborating across the institution with faculty to make this work. So all the more reasons to connect them. Now, this shows you also some of the logics. If you look at those working in open publications in that column, or research data or open education, the X's here are the level of difficulty. But so many of us are dealing with similar challenges. So be this advocating for open across the 3 different opens, that's hard, changing culture. The skills needed to make things open are undecidedly harder with open education, but open licensing is really key across the board, but particularly key for open education, high skills necessarily there. Rewards and incentives, that's a very hard nut to crack across the board as well. Quality, we all get criticism on, well, to what extent are you providing quality when you make things open? And how sustainable is this, and how are you going to make this more sustainable? And we're also, of course, as part of that, looking at not just the business models that we know of, but also inventing newer, more equitable business models going forward. So as you can see, there are many areas where there are synergies. And although you may have different staff, and sometimes the same staff working on this, are we really connecting and building capacity as much as we could be? So coming back to this project, Connecting the Opens. What the vision here is to provide more equitable access to information for all. So that's for research and educational material in higher education, and taking a more coordinated approach to both. Now, there are quite some organizational barriers because, as I mentioned earlier on, they're often organized in very different places. They're also funded by very different instances. So that is something that we need to look at. How can we bring some of those worlds together, despite how staff is managed, for example, on an institutional level? We need to help institutions more effectively meet some of those policy requirements, either set by UNESCO or other international bodies, but also on national and local levels, and more strategically and more efficiently by connecting the opens. We really think that we can do that better by connecting the opens, and also helping implement national research and innovation and dissemination policy agendas, connecting those dots between the opens, and of course complying with funder requirements. So the need, we're still also trying to identify the need, but it's vital to better understand, therefore, how current processes are actually working. So within the institution, within the university, where are there overlaps? Where are there intersections? Like I mentioned in my earlier table there. How do they interact on a management perspective? Are there any inefficiencies? Are there opportunities where we could collaborate more? So we are investigating this, and we would really like to hear from you. What institutions are connecting the opens have had this conversation around these synergies or these blockages to move forward on that level. And we're investigating this. We're going to be talking to 10 universities or universities of applied sciences colleges to understand the case, because we want to build a better narrative to provide the case for open based on an evidence base. So by talking to 10, but we would love to hear from you also in the audience. Hear about any organizations. If you could put those in the chat or send me an email, I'll give you the information at the end. Are there organizations already connecting the opens strategically? Do they have plans? Are there policies in place? Or is there also literature that we could call on? Because we really want to build this strong case and get this message out there, why we think this is important, but also built on why other institutions think this is important. Because we want to create a narrative and strategy, particularly, as I say, for institutional leaders, for policymakers, to encourage them to set up more supportive policy for all the opens and funding, which will mean more practice across Europe. Okay, so just moving forward. So what have we been doing? We have in this project, the Connecting the Opens project, there are three big activities. One is mapping who are the actors across Europe working in the opens, and usually they're not across the opens like us. So we mapped who are the international, national, regional, and institutional policymakers in particular, particularly the institutional ones and libraries. Who are the umbrella organizations and the multipliers, like the professional networks who represent libraries like LIBE, or the associations that represent universities like the European University Association? Or we also have a large movement of many university alliances. Where do they sit on the open fence there? So we've been mapping who they are. We've also been looking at the funders of open access, open science, open education. Are any of those funders funding across the opens, or is it more in those silos? Looking at public and private, we're starting to look at those also to see how they could support us going forward. So if we were to provide more support for other institutions to connect the opens going forward, we need to think about how to make that sustainable. So which funders would be interested in helping us going forward? And we've also been looking at some of the blockers, of course, on this journey. So although you may have some very strong networks in place, but what are some of those blockers? In Europe, for example, one of the blockers is that there is a very large focus on open research rather than open education, where a lot of efforts and policy priorities are in that area. So that can be a blocker for open education. There's a lack of time. Then there's also the concern of AI, which can be an enabler and a blocker. But we need to examine all of these things and how they impact also our key stakeholders who will take this forward together with us going forward. So secondly, we're going to be documenting the similarities and the differences between those institutions and develop an action plan so that we can help others. And all to also feed in to see whether Spark Europe can have a place here to connect the worlds of open for institutions. So it's really a feasibility study to see is there a need? Is there an argument for opens? And if so, what are the needs of the institution to take this further? So that's what we're working on. So what we are doing is we are interviewing the first universities this month. We have been a bit delayed, so the abstract that we submitted, we thought we'd be further along the line, but things happen with projects. But we are excited to be talking to a number of senior leaders at universities with libraries and educators. We asked them about the brief history of open education and open science. Do they have a vision or a mission, goals? Are the values aligned to a broader open? Are there any political or organizational and cultural drivers? Is there a national movement like in the Netherlands to connect? Or, for example, a movement to accelerate open education? What kind of case is there for connecting the opens? Is this more of a headache than an opportunity? So what are some of those blockers? And is there a concrete strategy in place, or is it more being fed bottom up? Or have you got to the stage where, as a university leader, you have a policy in place, or you're developing one because you think it makes sense? We know that there are not many who are already at that place, but still, we are going to talk to a range, also about the incentives to either open for open research, or for open education, or for connecting them. And then we also want to know what role senior leadership is taking in any of this. And then what resources do they need? Do they have the resources if they want to connect the opens slowly but surely? Or they're in the middle of it and they need further resources. What kind of resources do they need? So these are the things that we are asking. So what's coming up next? We will be completing this work in August next year. So we have just started. So we're interviewing university leaders this year. We hope we will complete those interviews. We'll analyze that data. We're also looking at literature that looks at connecting the opens in higher education. And we are further investigating what kind of funders would be interested in funding not just open education or open access or open research data, but a more broader open agenda for the public good. And then we will come early next year with making a strong case, and we hope that this case for connecting the opens will ring well for many of you. And we will then come up with an action plan on what Spark Europe can be doing, with also some of those partners I've already identified when we did that stakeholder mapping. So I think I'd just like to end asking you if you could share either by email, sharing by ideas by email, or putting those in the chat. Paola's also with me, I see. Do share those with us. So what literature are you aware of that addresses the opens? Who do you know of who's connecting the opens in higher education, either strategically or on a policy level, or more informally, bottom up? Are there any interesting narratives or strategies that we should look at? Or any policies, if you have any links to those, it would be ever so helpful. Doesn't matter if you're not in Europe, we would really like to hear from you. I'd like to apologize for my bad cold and my voice. I saved it enough for this presentation, but it might dry up. But thank you very much for your attention. And Paola and I are here for any questions you might have. Again, this was a collaborative presentation. It was just me giving the talk. Thank you. I'll stop sharing now.
Are there any questions for our presenters? You all are welcome to use the chat, or even better, come off mute and ask away.
Are any of you working already in connecting the opens? I see some familiar faces. It's very nice of you to attend today. Just
Amy
taking
says in the chat that it was very interesting. Thank you. Ron answered yes in the chat.
If anybody would like to take the microphone to tell us a bit more about what you're doing, that would be very welcome. April, can you make that happen? If they'd like to, that is.
Yes, they are welcome to speak. They have that option. They can come out, they can share. Ron says an open digital learning materials.
That's right. Robert van der Forum we know well, who's also advising us. So we're very grateful to his help. They're doing a lot in the Netherlands, so do watch that space going forward.
Brian writes that your project is interesting and gives ideas to pursue related to research for dissertation.
Oh, that's great. Brian, if you have any questions, do reach out. Would love to hear more and see more work in this area. It really is very much in its infancy, this connecting the opens that we're seeing in Europe. I'm not sure how it is in the US. Would anybody like to share?
Francis came on camera. Did you want to to share? You're on mute if you're saying
I haven't
something.
been able to figure out how to raise my hand.
Okay. It's in the reactions, in the reactions button down at the bottom, just for future reference. But yeah, you want to share?
Okay, so this is not quite America, but something that we're working on. The Central European University Press is working with a new entity. It's called the Invisible University for Ukraine, and it was set up after the full-scale invasion in 22 to provide ways in which Ukrainians could get education, even if they were displaced, hopefully temporarily. And we got a grant from the Open Society University Network to develop an OER, which is going to be on the history of migration, with the greater Ukrainian territory being the case study. But what we're developing with this is a whole set of documentations and a toolkit for particularly university presses to get engaged with the whole OER movement, because my belief is that there's space here to add value with what it is that university presses can bring to content, to work with it, make it more sustainable, make it more publishable, as it were, and to work with all the stakeholders that everybody's been talking about at this excellent conference. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you so much, Francis. I just had a coughing fit. But connecting the opens on that level is really vital. And I'm so glad you mentioned it. The role of university presses traditionally working on opening publications, but connecting to research data and making OER. So thank you so much for that input. Thank you.
Thank you for what you're doing.
Hi,
Jonathan.
There's a question from Jonathan. Yes. Hi, Jonathan. The question is about faculty in STEM fields in Europe who are deeply involved in open pedagogy. So I have no specific example in mind now, but I can reach out later with that. But most of the time, what happens is that they are not even aware that they are talking about open pedagogy. Okay, so for example, they are frequently using FET. I don't know if you are familiar with FET, the database of educational resources that started with physics, but now runs across different STEM areas. and offers exercises, practices, pedagogies, simulations. That's what they started with. And they are using them, meaning that they are very familiar with open pedagogies, reusing resources and adapting them to specific groups of learners, but they might not even be aware of the expression that we are familiar with, open educational resources or open pedagogies. But let me look into that more in depth, and I will reach out to some answers for you, Jonathan.
All right, well, let's again thank our presenters for the information that was shared here, and wish you all an enjoyable day with the rest of your sessions.
Thank you very much all again. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, so I'm going to stop the recording.